Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to another episode of Behind Beliefs and Behaviors. I am your host, Dr. Maisha, and I'm very excited for this episode, particularly because it is not only our final episode of season one, but it's also the final episode of the year. And, this time is a time for deep reflection for myself and for most people, for many people, I should say, who delve in the realm of personal development, who are trying to better themselves. This time of the year is a time for reflection. It's a time for completion. And so, what better title today than Behind Meaningful Change is self-examination and just talking about how we move forward. There was a quote that I came across very recently, and the quote is by Buddha, and it says, "All that we are is a result of all that we have thought." And I find that so meaningful. As you know, much of what I talk about is how we mind our thoughts. And when we look at, and I'm going to talk specifically about where we are today as a society, but also you can map this on to where you are in your life. When we look at where we are as a society, all that we are is a result of the collective thought, all of the collective thought. And so when we think about how do we move forward into this coming year, how do we move forward, especially navigating the landscapes that we are now navigating? For some people, there's a lot of fear. For some people, there's a lot of anger. For some people, there is a sense of grief and checking out. How do we move forward when we have this very divided and intense, contentious type of landscape? And I think it definitely starts at the individual level of self examination, but we have to also begin to move into the collective societal examination of thought, the collective examination of how we think as community. And so when we look at self examination, I often, when I do my talks, I talk about the Goldberg systems based thinking. And if you were to envision a pyramid, at the top of the pyramid is the result. It's what we're seeing today, right? It is the behaviors, the outcomes, the policies. It's what we're seeing today. And if you're an individual, at the top of that would be your life, what you can see the result of your life. So when you go beneath the surface, just beneath the surface, you can start to look at what are the policies, what are the systems that are in place that uphold that result or that outcome. But as you continue to go deeper, you begin to look at what are the mental maps, the mental thought patterns that lead to the systems and policies. And then you look at what is the trauma that feeds into. So you have what's the mental model, what are the collective paradigms, what is the collective thought pattern, and then what is the individual mental model that feeds into the collective. And then but underneath that, what is the underlying trauma that feeds into those individual mental model? And at the very bottom, you could ask yourself, where are we losing humanity? Okay, so we have outcome, we have the systems, we have the collective paradigms that uphold those systems, we have the individual mental models that give the collective paradigms, we have the trauma that feeds all of these various individual mental models that create the collective paradigm that then lead to a systemic paradigm that lead to the outcome. And finally, you have where humanity is. And so when we are looking at meaningful change, we have to go below the surface. We have to go below What is the system? The system is very important to examine, but we have to begin to examine ourselves, our mental models, in order to look at what meaningful change would look like. If we take that to, say, the family unit, and we look at, let's say, what maybe it's a family that would be considered, I'm going to put my air quotes up here, dysfunctional, right? Because what is dysfunctional? We say that everything works for the outcome that you're getting. So it's functional for the outcome that you're getting. Now, does it work for the goals that you want? Does it work for the values, the deep core values that you have? Does it work for the life that you desire? That is a different story. That is a different question. However, every dynamic works for the unconscious attachment that is happening. Every dynamic works for the result that's currently happening. All right. So I want you to follow me here, because what I'm saying is that where we are, it may not work for where we want to be in our lives, but the behaviors are working for the current outcome. And so, if we want to change the outcome, we have to go deeper than the surface structures, the surface systems. Now, the systems must change, but our systems, our environment is limited by our beliefs, are limited by the container of the identity of who we see ourselves to be. And even our identity is limited and contained by what we see our higher purpose or the bigger picture to be. So when we begin to go deeper into those mental models and examine at the level of, yes, do we examine at the level of environment and behavior? Absolutely. We can examine at the level of environment, and that's where our policies and our structures and our systems lives, at the level of environment. Then we need to begin to ask those deeper questions. So the question is, what behaviors are happening that feed the environment? And then you want to look at, what are the belief systems collectively and individually? And when we're talking about at the family unit, and particularly when we're talking about organizationally speaking or communities, this actually can be where change gets lost, because everybody has their different belief systems and individualism is at play. And what I have noticed when I work with organization is that people definitely are interested in looking at, oh, what are the actions that we can take systemically? What are the policies we can put in place? But when it comes to examining one's beliefs and values, there is a fear that comes up. And I believe that fear comes up because we are often afraid that our identity will be taken away. And again, that is rooted very much in individualism. And what we know is there are communities that thrive even more so than we're thriving, whether it looks like they're thriving like we are thriving or not, based on more of a sense of collective and community, not on the basis of individualism. Okay. And not collective as in group think, but collective as in interdependence, and the understanding that we can celebrate ourselves as individuals while we act independently, while we tie our freedom to each other. We're co-liberating, we're permanent partnering, right? And so we have to examine, what are the fears that drive the beliefs, that drive the behaviors, and where do those fears come from? What traumas, like either personal traumas, familial traumas, generational traumas, feed into that? And then we want to look at, can we begin to widen the sense of who we are as an identity? Now, this is happening on the individual level specifically, because I think that this work has to happen at the individual level in order for it to make a difference at the community level or at the organizational level. For example, if I am a CEO in an organization and my identity, my view of being a CEO is based on a particular very rigid way of being, a authoritarian rather than authoritative, right? Authoritarian model, then the way I'm going to interact with my staff, with my employees, and even with my partners and contracting and colleagues, I should say, is going to be impacted in that way and will the limit the relationship. But when I widen the scope of what CEO means and what I widen the scope of what leader means in this capacity, and I begin to shed this rigid identity. And I understand that it can be very scary to shed one's identity. But when we begin to shed that old identity and widen the scope of what our role is, of who we think we are, then it actually begins to expand our belief systems and impact our values and expand those values to a higher level, which will impact our behavior, which will impact the environment. And then finally, taking it a step further, if the bigger purpose is simply driven by revenue, then I am going to assume a particular role that may be rigid, that may be money driven, that may be disconnected or dissociated from the person, maybe a little bit less compassionate than if the higher purpose or the vision is impact. Then there's going to be more my interactions with people, with my staff, with the people with whom I'm working, my clients, my colleagues, is going to be more relational. And so when we look at moving forward in this current landscape, the first thing that really has to happen is self-examination. What's happening in the environment? How is that impacting my behaviors? How are my behaviors impacting the environment? What are my beliefs and fears? There's a lot of broken trust. There's a level of what feels like lack of safety. And in the community, how do we restore that? How do we examine what's really underneath that at the individual level? So, person by person, individual by individual, we can begin to reconnect. And so, this is just something I think is good to reflect on as we move into the new year, because we're moving into a new season. And it is a season of great unknown. And contrary to many people's beliefs, we will need each other. We will need community. And so let's look at examining ourselves, but examining ourselves inside of community and as community, examining ourselves so that we can then begin to expand those paradigms of beliefs and values and identity and collectively move forward for, you know, a better outcome despite the unknown. So with that, I leave you with this quote. Again, the quote, "We all that we are as a result of all that we have had." But the second quote that I came across is, "Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own unguarded thoughts." All right. So please take a moment to share this episode with a friend, a family member, a colleague, because as we move forward, we're going to be needing to self examine, self individual and self collective. And if your organization is interested in me coming in and facilitating these dialogues, please reach out to me at mindremappingacademy.com. So I look forward to our next conversation. I bid you a safe and happy holiday season. Happy New Year. And until the next time I see you, stay empowered.